Step into the squared circle, where the bell echoes through decades, where main events become legends and tag teams tore the house down. From the undercard to the top of the card, this is Portland Wrestling at its finest. One ring, one city, 1,000 stories. This is Ringside in Rose City. And here's your hosts, Frank Culbertson and Mike Rogers.
Hey, thanks, Lisa. Great introduction as also. I'm Frank Culbertson, joined by the hip by Portland Wrestling historian, author, and noted Northwest referee,
Mike Rogers.
And this is Ringside in Rose City. One ring, one city, and 1,000 stories, all rooted right here in Portland. You know, Mike, when we talk about the names that pack the Portland Sports Arena week after week, there's the Grapplers, there's the Roses, the Stasiaks. But there's another story, one that doesn't always get told, and it's a story about talent that had to fight not just opponents, but the system itself. Because for years, right here in Oregon, women's professional wrestling wasn't just overlooked, it was banned.
That's right. From 1954 until 1975, women weren't even allowed in the ring in this state. And not because they couldn't wrestle, but because people decided that they shouldn't. It took a Supreme Court decision to finally open that door again. And when that door opened, a generation of tough, determined, incredibly skilled women stepped right through it.
And one of those was a young woman from the Pacific Northwest, a fan who sat in those very same arenas watching, learning, dreaming, and eventually deciding that's going to be me. She didn't just step into the business, she earned it the hard way, learning the old school style, setting up rings, promoting shows, doing whatever it took just to be around the business.
When she finally stepped into that ring, she became Princess Victoria, a name that would take her from Portland to Madison Square Garden to the top of the wrestling world as one half of the WWF Women's Tag Team Champions.
Like so many of the wrestling stories we've covered, Mike, hers comes with both triumph and heartbreak, because on September 1st, 1984, in Philadelphia, her career came to a sudden and devastating end after a neck injury in the ring. A career that lasted 4 years, but left its mark that is still remembered today. And maybe that's what makes stories like this so important. It's not always about how long the run was. It's about how much impact you made while you were there. And tonight, we get to hear that story of impact straight from the source. From the front row in Salem to the bright lights of the WWF to a life beyond the ring. And Mike, when you've got one of the true revolutionary pioneers of Portland wrestling era sitting right ringside with us, you don't waste any more time. You go straight to the interview. So Lisa, if you would, punch that connect button and bring Princess Victoria into the Rose City ring with us. Princess Victoria, welcome to Ringside in Rose City.
Thank you for having me. How's everybody doing tonight?
Well, it's a beautiful sunny day here in Portland, Oregon. How is it where you're at?
Beautiful. It's like 72, no wind, which is strange for Oklahoma, you know. Not having any wind, you start looking like this. All right, what's wrong?
You listen for the sirens to go off.
Exactly.
So we've got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about, but I want to mention right off the top that you have a brand new book coming out in July titled Fighting the Wrong Side of the Sun. It'll be available starting July 22nd at the Gathering fan event in North Carolina. And Mike, I've been looking at the list of wrestlers going to be at the Gathering, and it's a virtual who's who in wrestling history. The Grappler and Tony Anthony will be there together for the first time in years. Scott Norton, Mick Foley, Tito Santana, and the list goes on and on. And of course, Princess Victoria, you'll be there. So talk about that event and your new book.
Okay, with the new book, like you said, it's called Fighting the Wrong Side of the Sun. And it's about my life. There is a lot of wrestling in it. It shows where I started out as a child, how I got into wrestling, what I did in wrestling, what I'm doing now after my career. I won't say my career was over because I walked away when Moolah did me the way she did me. I left the hill with $20 in my pocket and what I could pack in my Malibu station wagon. My heart was broke because I came up in Portland wrestling with the best of the best. And I was little sister. I started working at the arena about 14, 15 years old. I was setting up rings, tearing them down, working at the print shop that Sandy had, making posters. And he had one of those old school printers that you got a 5-foot piece of metal and you burnt the plate. And then you put it on the roll on the printer and you rolled them out. Well, that wasn't bad until Sandy decided off the cuff, oh, we're going to add more colors to this. So we had to run it like 4 times with your main colors. And if it was even off that much, a half an inch, nope, throw it away and start over. And when I first started going to the matches in Portland, I was a dyed-in-the-wool fan. I've still got the 8x10 that Jimmy Snuka signed for me when I was 9 years old.
I want to ask you, that was one of my questions was, you're from Goldendale, Washington, a fairly small town. It was 3,000 to 4,000 people back then, not far from the Dalles, Oregon. So you got Portland Wrestling TV there. And so who were some of the wrestlers you remember watching, and how did you know that's what you wanted to do?
The wrestlers that I saw, and this is a story. I used to stay a lot with my grandma and my grandpa. We ate at the table 6 days a week. But Saturday, when wrestling came on, we ate in the living room, and I was in between Grandpa's legs while he was in his recliner. Grandma was over here, and we'd watch Portland wrestling. And like I said, I was a dyed-in-the-wool fan. Stan Stasiak, Dutch Savage, Dale Lewis, oh Lord, Red Bastien, the builders of wrestling, my idols, my legends.
Yeah.
And I didn't really decide that I wanted to become a female wrestler because, as you said, women's wrestling was banned at that time. But one day, I'm working for Sandy. We're cleaning up after the Saturday night matches. And he said, Vicky, come here. I want to talk to you. And he said, look, and he said, I've got this girl that's training. She wants to be a professional wrestler, but I can't have her wrestling the guys. Would you come in and be a body to work with her? And of course, like all good wrestlers, the first thing I said, well, how much does it pay? I went down there. I was her body for the first week. And then all of a sudden she didn't show up. And we didn't train one day every 2 weeks or one day every week. We trained 6 days a week. And when Velvet and I were training, if we weren't training, we were working for Sandy. I get in there, she doesn't show up, and then I'm standing in the corner and Sandy starts me wrestling the guys. And it didn't really come into my brain at the time because as soon as I took my first bump, I was hooked. You know, this is what I want to do. I've always been athletic in my life. And about 3 weeks later, when the girls still hadn't showed up, I'm standing there in the ring and I'm looking. I'm the only girl and I'm wrestling the guys. But Sandy said he couldn't have a girl wrestle the guys. That's why he brought me down here. But I'm wrestling the guys. And like I said, by then it was too late. I was hooked. I fell into it. You know, I tell everybody, Sandy tricked me into becoming a female wrestler. And then he brought Velvet in from Canada to train with me. And one day Sandy tells me, he says, and I lived in this old wino motel on the east side of Portland, Oregon. He said, when you go home tonight, I want you to pack your stuff. I'll be there an hour after you get there. Have your stuff down in the lobby, which it was, like I said, a wino motel. And no, when you showered with a knife in your hand because the door didn't lock properly.
No.
And Sandy showed up, got all my stuff in the car. I said, where am I going? He says, you're coming to live with me and my wife. And bless her heart, his wife, Sherry, had 2 16-year-old girls in her house, and she welcomed us as family. And then if you look at the time that I came up in, I could never. Buddy Rose, Roddy Piper, Stan Stasiak, Dutch Savage. Oh, Lord, come on. Ed Wiskowski. I mean, the cream of the crop. And I had become little sister. You don't mess with little sister. If you did, you got put into a locker. And I have heard that there was one time a guy was put into a locker. And I was training. And then one day, Sandy says, all right, there was a tough guys fight. at the Salem Fair, the Oregon State Fair. And he said, all right, I'm going to do this tough guys fight. I want you to be in the prelim. I want you to wrestle this guy. Well, this guy was covered head to toe. He had literally a bodysuit on. There were holes cut for his eyes, but from the top of his head to the tips of his toes were totally this grayish blue. And he said, and I said, well, who am I going to be wrestling? He said, you'll find out when you get there. And when I walked out to the ring and they announced me, and then they announced the guy, and for the Lord of me, I can't remember what they called him. And I got in the ring and we were wrestling, and I went to pick him up for a body slam, and he went dead weight on me. And I went to pick him up and he went dead weight, just limp. And I said, no, no, no. And I picked this guy up and I gave him a shoot body slam. And then me and another girl, we'd been trained to do boxing. And if you ever want to lift something that's heavier than lead, have 8-ounce gloves on for 3 minutes. They turn into 8,000 pounds. It's like you've got 2 minutes into the match, you've got cinder blocks for arms. And this girl, she really never paid attention to the training. I knew the step, right leg back, front left leg forward, you balance back and forth, the whole 9 yards. And what she did was she came at me like this, head completely down and punching up. Well, I just sidestepped her because she couldn't see where she was going anyway. But she went out through the second and third row. And me being me, there was a concrete floor there. When she went out, she was going to land slap on her head. So I hooked her right about the waist and I pulled her back in. And the boxing match, it was a split decision in her favor. And about 2 years later, after I had been on the road a while, Sandy said, oh, by the way, I thought I'd let you know I rigged that match, that boxing match you had. I said, what do you mean you rigged it? He said, you couldn't win no matter what. And I said, Sandy, why the hell did you do that? And he says, I didn't want you getting a big head.
Oh, my.
Oh, no.
That was Sandy Barr.
Wow.
I know that once you completed your training with Sandy and you were booked in the Northwest, and we're going to talk about that, was it impossible to get booked anywhere else without Moolah's backing? And what advice did Sandy give you on this topic?
After we worked for Ed Genetti in Idaho. We worked for Al Tonko in Canada, BC.
Uh-huh.
We worked for Don Owens. And that's unheard of even today, to have a woman staying in a territory for any longer than 2 or 3 nights.
Right.
But they kept me going for almost a year. They kept me in Velvet going for almost a year. And one day Sandy came to me in Velvet and he said, look, girls, it's like this. I have done my best. Moolah has a stranglehold on women wrestling. If you want to continue to wrestle, you're going to have to go to Moolah. He said, I'll arrange it. I'll pay for your flight down there, all of that. And I had made a stop off because the boys were staying in Charlotte, about 125 miles from Columbia. And I'd made a stop off. I stayed for 2 weeks. I was there with Piper and the boys and just having a good time, because Piper and I had a on-off relationship from 78 to like 81. And I stopped there for 2 weeks, and Piper begged me. He begged me. He said, Vicki, don't go to Moolah. He said, you can stay here as long as it takes for you to get a foothold, but please don't go to Moolah. Well, I wanted to wrestle. And as with today, I was hard-headed and I went there anyway. The first 4 years working with Moolah, you know, how do I put this? It had 2 sides to her. Depending on what you could give her, what she could use out of you, was how she treated you. And yeah, I'm mad at what she did. But in my eyes, there's Moolah the wrestler and there's Lillian Ellison, the booker. And I have to look at that as two separate people. Lillian Ellison, the booker, if I were to see her today, I'd punch her right in the face. No ifs, ands, or buts. But I have to respect Moolah the wrestler. If it wasn't for Moolah, she came up in hard times for women wrestlers. And I have to respect her for that. But went there, I got there, and Velvet came. She came to see me. I hadn't told her I was going to stop off in Charlotte. And she goes, "Where have you been?" And she started laughing. She says, "Moolah's been going around going, where's that fucking Indian? Where's that fucking Indian?" And finally I got there. I took a Greyhound bus because, like I said, it's 125 miles. There's no sense in getting on a plane in Charlotte and landing in Columbia. And I ended up rooming with Joyce Grable on the Hill. And we had a few issues between us. So Moolah moved me down. I stayed with Donna Alfonsi. And that was my roommate for the rest of the time I was there.
Wow.
But after everything went and Moolah did me the way she did me, I know now why the boys didn't want me to go. Lillian Ellison screwed a lot of the girls for a long time.
So I got to ask, where did the name Princess Victoria come from? And you had a great headdress that you wore. Where did that come from?
That headdress, and you saw the choker with the red beads. I still have the choker with the red beads. The headdress got destroyed in a flood.
Oh,
But they both came from Jay Youngblood for my opening match.
wow.
Yeah, that's saying a lot. And see, Jay's dad had given him the headdress and the choker. And that made it 10 times more than what it was.
Sure.
And if you look at the clothes that I wore, everything that I wore to my first match, other than the headdress and the choker, were in my closet. The brown vest with the feathers on it, the moccasins, the black skirt, all of that was already in my closet.
Wow.
And one day Sandy came up to me and he asked both Velvet and I, "All right, who are you going to be in the ring?" Velvet didn't really say anything. She said, "I'm Velvet McIntyre." Me, I wanted, and I had dreamt about this, I wanted to be quote unquote Misty LeFleur, which in French is raining flowers. And Sandy said, "Can you speak French?" I said, "No." He said, "Then how are you going to be a French girl?" He said, "Your name's Princess Victoria. You're an Indian," which I am. Hey, and that's your name. And from then on, it was 30 cents, and I've been Princess Victoria ever since.
Wow. So
Yeah.
you mentioned your first match, and I know you did a wrestling interview, and you said your first match was in Boise, Idaho, and it went 20 minutes. What do you recall about that match? And also, I don't find any newspaper clippings about that, but I found 3 from Burley, Idaho, which is 160 miles from Boise, and it's Velvet and Inferno won against Princess Victoria and Bo. They beat you by a questionable pin, of course. Moondog Moretti was on that show, and then you guys wrestled 3 more times. You wrestled in a mixed tag match with Bo against the Inferno and Velvet, and then a 6-man or 6-person Australian mixed tag team the next week. So what do you remember about Boise?
The first match that I wrestled, Sandy had this thing in his head where he wanted me to come in and jump over the top rope. I didn't have any confidence in it. And if you don't have confidence in a move, you need to say, "No. Well, I'm doing what Daddy Sandy wants me to do." And I go to jump over the rope, and my left leg and my right leg got stuck on the rope. And I'm sitting there with my hand on the turnbuckle trying to figure out how to get out of this without falling on my tail. And if you remember Lanny Poffo, when he would jump in the ring and land in that position, and it hit me, and I did the exact same thing that Lanny did. But I was so nervous. My hands were so sweaty, they slipped on the ring. And the match itself, unfortunately, that was the longest 20 minutes in 20 years I have ever spent. I don't think Velvet and I ever stopped. I think we tagged in the guys like one time for 30 seconds, and then it was me and Velvet again. And being with Velvet on the road, bless her heart, that girl deserves a halo, because from the day we met to going to Moolah's, we were still friends. To this day, we're still friends. And she put up with me on the road. She has to have wings and a halo, because me and Velvet have never had an argument.
Wow.
Not one time in the 45 years that I've known her have we had an argument. She'll suggest something, and I'll say what I think about it. Then she'll say her part. But as far as getting in an argument, we never had heat with each other. Not ever. I had her back and she had mine. And to this day, it's still the same.
Well, I know you worked with her, especially on that first Northwest run, and you wrestled each other over and over. How did you keep those matches fresh? And who booked the matches for you? Did you work it out together, or did you have input from others?
Sandy did something that I recommend any trainer, I don't care who they are, any trainer that is training young wrestlers, is one day he'd bring in Buddy Rose, and Buddy would lead the matches. The next time it'd be, Crippler, the Crippler, Rick Oliver. And then it'd be Roddy Piper. He just put everybody that was in the territory in there. And he put Professor Dale Lewis in there too. And then, oh my God, he put in Red Bastien. Now, we were all like, nobody, who goes through this? Because it was Sandy's job to filter out. We had, believe it or not, we had 4 trash cans, one on each side of the ring. And it wasn't if you were going to throw up, it's when you were going to throw up, into which garbage pail, and were you going to hit the garbage pail. There was one day we were training with Terry Allen, and in the Chautauqua Sports Arena, there was this big door. An 18-wheeler could fit through it very easily, and Sandy had the door open, and we'd been training hard that day. And I went and leaned against the rope, hooked the rope so I wouldn't fall down. Terry, Magnum TA, is in the middle of the ring. He's kind of in a thinker position. I was on the side of the ring that looked right through Terry to the door, and it was 75 degrees, and I saw steam coming off of Terry's head. That's how hard we worked out.
Wow.
And we all thought Sandy was so tough. Red Bastien made him look like a crybaby. We were praying to God that he wasn't coming the second day. Red Bastien, he was a friend of mine for a long time, me and Velvet. And then I found out not only were the guys going in and wrestling with us, because as Sandy said, I want you to wrestle as many people as I can get to you before you ever do a match. When we walked into the ring, we knew 3 things. First move after the lockup, high spot, and finish. Everything else that was done in the ring came naturally. And because of the way that Sandy had trained us, it was, you listen to the crowd. He not only taught us how to wrestle, he taught us the psychology as well. If I was beating the snot out of Velvet and she was a heel and the crowd wasn't getting into it, well, let's switch this around. Velvet can. And I love getting beat because I could just lay on the ground and roll around. Like I said, it was all psychology. I don't think we ever had a match that was the same as the previous match because it was a feel your way type of thing. And that's one thing that really bothers me today is I've been in a few dressing rooms with these kids. And I can say kids, I'll be 65 on May 5th, is that I have been in the dressing room and these kids will talk out a match. They'll talk for 2 hours on a 15-minute match. And the worst words I hear is, well, I got to get my this in and my that in and my other thing in. No, you need to bring those people into the story. And believe it or not, I blame the trainers because they have not trained these people correctly. And the ones they have, like Brandon Scott, I met Brandon, I believe it was on his first match with Tommy Dreamer. And he looked like Davy Jones at that time. You know, he's clean shaven. I'm an old Monkees fan. And I looked at him when he went to walk by me. I said, if you talk in an English accent, I'm going to pass out right here. But if you look at where Brandon is now, he's working for AEW. He does not have time off. He is one heck of a wrestler. But he wasn't in there talking match after match because he was working with Tommy. And I'm sure Tommy, being old school, he knew what the three things: move after the lockup, high spot, finish. And they had one hell of a match. And to this day, Brandon Scott is a heck of a wrestler.
So let's go ahead and talk about some of your matches in Oregon. It looks like Salem and Eugene booked you on a regular basis. We call you a groundbreaking wrestler in both those locations. You were the first woman there in 3 years. You worked Pendleton, Seaside, Redmond, Longview. I could go on. But Don Owen in Portland didn't use you very often. And we just talked to the grappler, who you know very, very well. And he said getting Don to be more up to date in booking was almost impossible. So what are your memories of Don, and how, and when you did get booked by him, how was he to work for?
In my opinion, there's two top promoters that I work for that took care of their health, that paid us guys. And that's Don Owens and Bill Watts in Louisiana. I hold those two in high regard. And I think the matches that we worked there, especially Salem, when Buddy Rose and Rip Oliver threw me into the brick wall and I busted my head open. And I'm laying there because I don't feel like getting up after sliding down a brick wall. And all of a sudden I look up and there's a person straddling me. And I realized it was my little brother, Doug. And he went into perfect boxing stance because I had taught him how to fight, because he was a freckle-faced little kid that everybody liked to pick on. So I had to teach him how to defend himself. And Doug's up there. He's got the fist drawn back. He's just rippling. He's 15. And he looks at Buddy Rose and Rick Oliver. He says, touch her again, you son of a bitch, and I'll kill you. Now, I never smartened up my family. I would not take wrestling away from them. I never smartened up anybody unless I was told to. And we went, and that match, this is one of my hearts. I found out several years later, probably 5 years ago, that this 8-man battle royal, I was supposed to be the first one out, according to Don. Now, we're talking about Tommy Rogers, Ed Wiskowski, Buddy Rose, Rip Oliver, Sandy Barr, all the boys. I went in there, and I mean, I didn't try to beat anybody or throw anybody out because I'm a girl, and they're all like 250 pounds, right? I would hide behind one of the wrestlers, and when they went to lift the legs, I'd give them some help there. And I had to sit there and watch security take my brother off the stage. Thank God Sandy Barr knew who he was. And I got down to the dressing room, and everybody in the dressing room, who the heck was that? Who the hell was that? And I said, that was my little brother, Doug. And I wish to this day I could have taken him down in the dressing room, because everybody was hyped up that what he did. And unfortunately, like I said, I never smartened them up, so I couldn't take them into the dressing.
Now, we know a couple of, to follow up on that match that you're talking about, the Battle Royal, there's been a couple of moments where the crowd has gone silent in Portland wrestling when the Bruise Brothers knocked Don Owen down towards the end of the Portland Sports Arena era. The crowd went silent. Now, what was the crowd reaction when you came up bloody? Because you're the first woman to have bled in any Portland wrestling arena.
First and last, from what I know. When I sat up and I was bleeding, like you said, the crowd went dead silent. And then all of a sudden they roared, and even though they only went dead silent a couple of seconds, it felt like forever. But then they roared. And about the time that they roared, my brother was over the top of me, gonna kick Rick and Buddy's tail. And see, Buddy Rose made me. Sandy Barr trained me, but all this stuff that I was doing with Buddy Rose was right after the great Piper Buddy Rose feud. I mean, Piper was gone maybe a week, and Buddy Rose was if not one of the most hated man in Portland, in Oregon, and Washington. And I found out that Don Owens was okay with me being in the Battle Royal, but I was supposed to be the first one out. Now you put all these guys together, and all these guys know what Don Owens said. And all these guys, okay, we're going to do it this way, and they had to agree to do it, and that's why you'll always hear me say, Buddy Rose made me. Wow. Because the most hated man in wrestling in the Northwest, in the Pacific Northwest, was beaten up on me. And he made me. I can go there now. And people still, which I still haven't figured that out. People, I could go to Portland and people would know who I was. And that's because of Buddy Rose. Yeah. Even after I started wrestling for Moolah, if I went into a territory, usually there were one of my brothers, and in Pacific Northwest, we were a family. Highly dysfunctional family, but we were a family. And I could go into, like I went into New York with my car, and I had three other girls in the car. And Piper and Morocco follow us. They always made sure we knew exactly where the venue was when I was with them in the territory. They always made sure that we knew which motel room to stay in. They always took care of us when I was around. And if I didn't know anybody in the territory, one of my brothers would have called them and said, take care of the princess. And to this day, they don't call me Vicky. They call me the princess.
I know you start working some mixed tag teams in the Northwest area. One example is you're teaming with Matt Bourne and Steve Regal against Rose and Oliver and Velvet. What are some memories of working those matches where you're really, in part of the main event?
That it wasn't really work. Being in the ring with people that I was in the ring with, especially Velvet, it wasn't work. We were in there and it didn't matter. See, Velvet and I didn't have this ego thing that a lot of the guys do and the girls do. You can't beat me. I won't take a fall for this person. Who loses? That old saying comes into play. It's not who wins or loses, it's how you played the game. Were those fans interested? Did they lean up in their chairs like this? Did they get their money's worth? Are they coming back next week? That was the way we did it. And the 6-man battle royals, there wasn't a lot of time that Velvet and I were in the ring. When it came down to the pin, I would pin Velvet or Velvet would pin me. That way, none of the guys had to take a fall.
Sure.
And there's been times, there was one time I was in Eugene. And if you've read my book, you know what my childhood was like. And I was working for Elton Owen. And the boys were there. And Rip Oliver came in. I think he was the booker at the time. And he said, Vicky, you've got a phone call. And I kind of did one of these. Who's calling me at the matches? Well, it was my bio mom. And she had told me that my stepfather was coming to the matches that night and wanted to see me. I slammed down the phone. I went back in the dressing room and I just sat down. And Rick Oliver looked at me and he said, "What's wrong, Princess?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "Bullshit. What's wrong?" And I had never told any of the boys about my childhood. So I had to do a quick story. And I see Rick going out the door. He comes back in. He talks to all the boys, walks over to me, and he says, "Vicky, you and Belle's single match just went to a mixed tag team with 4 managers, 2 managers for each team on the outside of the ring. If you see this man, just point him out and then turn your pretty little head because you don't want to see what we're going to do to him." They asked me what he looked like. I told them what he looked like. I never saw him. I think they caught him in the parking lot before he came in the building.
Wow.
That, like I said, I was a little sister.
Yeah. That's the family looking out for you.
That's what we were.
You talk about Salem and Eugene, and those really drew some big crowds, especially, as I mentioned, after you came up bloody. The next couple of weeks were all sellouts because this was something Portland had never seen, and it was new and exciting. And you said, if what you did fans come back? You absolutely brought fans back, and that's the name of the game. Because at those times, there were not the big TV contracts of today. It was the houses that were drawing. And so after that, you took off about 8 months in Portland. Did you go somewhere else? Because you came back in June of '82, and you started tagging with Sabrina against Wendy Richter and Joyce Grable. And if fans
Yes.
don't know about women's history and Wendy Richter, she was wrestling here in Portland. So how
Right.
did those matches come about, and who was booking you here with Wendy?
I had started working for Moolah in 1980, and we were actually booked in Portland. And I'm very sure that Sandy had a whole lot to do with wanting to see me in Velvet, but they put Sabrina with me. And there's no doubt in my mind, Sandy took care of it. Sandy was my dad. For a very long time, Sandy was my dad. I was a little wild child. I left home at 14. I had my first apartment, the Wine Old Motel, when I was 14 years old because it was leave or die. And I didn't know, and I know this is not topic, but I didn't know when I started staying with Sandy, me and Velvet shared a bed in our own room. And I can't tell you how many times I chased Art and Sean out of our bedroom, little snots. And I was a wild child. I'd been taking care of myself since I was 5 years old. You know, at 5 years old, I was making breakfast. I mean, it was nothing more than oatmeal, but I was making breakfast for my brothers. Every once in a while, I'd sneak out the window in our room and I'd head up to the Bomber Motel, which is where all the guys stayed. I went to Scott Teal's wrestling reunion in Tennessee, and Eric Emery was there. And I hadn't seen him in 40 years. And he walks up to me. He said, "Do you know how much sleep you cost me?" I said, "No. First of all, who are you?" Because it's 40 years later. And he said, "Eric Emery, Victoria." And I give him a big hug. And he says, "Now, do you know how much sleep you cost me?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "Every time you slipped out that back window," because Sandy had a security system that was state of the art at that time. He had the one where if a window was opened, it would show in his room where he had the thing that, okay, this window was open. And he'd get up when my window opened. He'd call up the boys until he got someone, and he'd tell them, "That crazy bitch is out there walking again. Will somebody go get her?"
Oh,
Oh no.
I didn't know that until 2014, 2015, when I met Eric again. I've got so many stories about Portland. I was so blessed to come up in wrestling in the Pacific Northwest when I did, because it was the cream of the crop. And nobody had an ego. If what we called a prima donna would come into the area, into the territory, they usually either got their ego put in check or they left. You know, I mean, we had one guy, and I'll remember this till the day I die. We had one guy come in every night. He needed tape, or he needed this, or he needed that. And he asked Buddy Rose one night for aspirin. Buddy being Buddy, he was already prepared. He had a bottle of, quote, aspirin. He gave him 4 of them. And then he told everybody, go watch the match, because it was a live TV match Saturday night. And he didn't tell anybody why. He said, no, you got to go watch the match. You got to go watch the match. And all of a sudden, this guy, you could see like his cheeks turned red. Well, we were thinking he was blown up until his entire body turned bright engine red. And what had happened was his buddy had given him 500 milligrams of niacin.
Oh, no.
Which is what happens is your body flushes the red and then you itch everywhere. And this kid was on live TV and he couldn't scratch. Well, he didn't need anything from anyone after that night.
Oh, I know you start touring territory to territory. Did you enjoy that, traveling, seeing different parts of the world, and any stories of the different territories, or traveling?
Oh, I love the traveling. I'm a gypsy at heart. I love the traveling. One thing Mula did for me was she co-signed for my Malibu station wagon. She took me to a car lot, and that Malibu station wagon lasted 5 years. And I guarantee you, I put over 40,000 miles on it.
Wow.
And I just loved it. The things we got to see. Of course, there were times when we go into a town for 2 or 3 days and we didn't have time to go see anything because Mula didn't know what an airplane was. And we drive it. Like one day we were in Alexandria, Louisiana, working for Bill Watts. I got a call from Mula, and Mula wanted us in Tampa, Florida the next night. And I'm going, okay, where do we pick up the plane tickets? No, you're going to drive. And I can tell you to this day, from the Alexandria, Louisiana high school to the motel that we stayed in Tampa was 821 miles.
Oh, no.
And I told Bill what she had done. And instead of being main event or semi-main event, he put us on first. And we drove 821 miles that night. And the only stops were made is when the tank was getting low. And you got your food, did your business in the bathroom, whatever, when I stopped. We left Alexandria, I believe it was like 9 o'clock at night. And we landed in Tampa 5 o'clock the next night.
Oh, geez.
And had to wrestle that night. But it was fun. I mean, when us girls were on the road, Wendy Richter, Velvet McIntyre, Judy Martin, Leilani Kai, Joyce Gribble, it wasn't work. It just wasn't work. We had a good time.
I know you made at least 2 trips to Japan. Was lady wrestling treated a little bit different in Japan from a promotion that was a complete ladies promotion? Was the style stiffer and quicker? And if so, was it hard to adapt to?
No, it wasn't hard to adapt to. No, to me, it wasn't any stiffer than it was stateside, but it was quicker. And we had Mimi Hagawara, who was a translator for us, and her and I became good friends. Love her to this day. And I loved going to Japan. I loved it. I wish I had more time because I went with Peggy Lee Leather one time. I went with Elizabeth Chase, and then I went with Wendy Richter. And yeah, and I love Japan because I could eat and eat and eat and eat, and I'd still lose weight. And I do miss the cuisine in Japan.
Well, I'm going to have to go to Japan then to lose weight.
Yes, sir.
I've got to tell you, Mike's interviewed over 100 wrestlers for his Ring Around the Northwest newsletter that he did for 30 years, and almost every single one talks about ribbing. But those were male wrestlers he interviewed. So did ribbing take place among the female wrestlers? And were there big ribbers? And were you a ribber?
The one rib that I remember the girls tried to pull on me, and it was at the Hill. And this was when I was living with Donna in the cabin right behind Moolah's house. And I had went out dancing that night and was just a little drunk. And I passed out on the couch, and all of a sudden my door started opening real slow. And after it opened all the way, this person in a trench coat, a low hat, and a butcher knife was standing at the door. And I was at the point where I looked up at him. I said, well, today's a good day to die, I guess.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. Number one, I knew it was a rib. I may have had a little sauce in me, but I knew it was a rib. Now, us pulling ribs, I've only had two of the guys pull a rib on me. And the first one was by a prima donna in Memphis. And I had been there earlier with, I think it was Peggy Lee. And this time I had went with Judy. And a lot of people ask me this question: do you female wrestlers date male wrestlers? And I tell them just like this. I said, I don't know. When you're working for a company, who do you go out to lunch with? Go out at 5 o'clock with? Who do you go party with? Well, people in my business. I said, same here. It's not that it was just, we were all wrestlers, and that's the way it was. It was like being in a business office. And anyway, I had went out with this guy the last time I was there. And when I say I went out, I'm being nice. And me and Judy got into town. We were sitting, the motel, we were on the second floor, and it had a guardrail on it. We're sitting out there, just enjoying the sun. And here comes Steve Kerr and Stan Lane. Were they the Fabulous Ones or the Midnight Express?
Fabs. They were the Fabs.
Got you. Anyway, they came up in this convertible, and Steve was up, Princess, I need to talk to you. So I walked downstairs, and he proceeds to tell me how this guy that I had dated the last time I was there was going around the dressing room telling everybody, oh, you ain't got a chance. After what I pulled on Princess Victoria last time, ain't nobody gonna date Princess but me. Jerry always had us girls in our separate dressing room away from the guys. And I told him, I said, look, I want to be in with the faces. And I'm in there, and I'm tying my boots. And here comes this guy, and he's standing right in front of me. Now, you can imagine I'm sitting down. What's right in front of my nose? And I'm tying, and he said, hey, Princess, how you doing? I looked up, I went good, and went back to tying my boots. And he went, well, we're going out tonight, right? And I just gave him this quizzical look. And he says, well, after what the fun we had last time that you were here, we're going out again tonight, right? I looked at him, I went, what? What do you mean about the last time I was here? He says, we had a night together. And I looked at him, I went, dude, I am so sorry. But I must have been drunk off my tail, because I ain't got a clue who you are. And the entire dressing room watched it. And this guy hangs his head and goes and crawls into the corner for timeout. Now, that was one. The other one was, and it was in the Pacific Northwest. One of the new guys that had come in had soaked my gear bag with water while I was in the ring. And you just have no clue what bag of worms you opened up, huh, boy? We went to Eugene, and he went out of the dressing rooms. Rip sent him to do a job or something. He said, come on, Princess. And I grabbed his boots. And you know how you play chicken in a pool on somebody's shoulders?
Yeah.
Well, that's what Rip did, is I got on his shoulders, and I had this bottle of super glue, and I put glue all over the bottoms of his boots and stuck them on the ceiling.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. And one of the things was, one of the sayings was, don't ever make the princess mad. And, when that I told Davy Boy and who was the other guy? Davy Boy Smith. Anyway, Davy was really good at pulling some horrendous ribs. And when I went in the dressing room, I go, mess with my bag. It's time for you to go. I said, I better not see one thing in my bag that doesn't belong. Davy Boy never did rib me after that.
Wow.
Well, I mean, you got to stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
Davy Boy got a few of the boys really bad. After I glued that guy's boots to the ceiling and put that other guy in his place, I never had a rib pulled on me from that point forward because they knew I was going to give a receipt and it was going to be twice the receipt of what they did. This guy, the guy that I glued his boots to the ceiling, had to go out to the ring with no boots because nobody would lift him up to pull his boots off the ceiling. And even if they did, it was those squares. It was going to stay stuck to the squares and the squares were going to come down. But I mean, he did it to himself.
Sure. Wrestling in the United States is definitely a male-based business. And I heard Wendy Richter talk about just wanting to be paid fairly. Was that frustrating for you, perhaps not being paid on the same scale that males were being paid who were at the same level that you were?
Let me put it like this. We were paid on the same scale, but Moolah got our money. There was only two promoters that would not send their money to Moolah, and that was Don Owens and Bill Watts. And I could never figure out until here recently how I made more money in Louisiana than I did working main event at Madison Square Garden. I think a lot of that, as long as you were booked by Moolah, was Moolah did it. Because Judy Martin found, who was it, Arnold Scoland, I think, or Pat Patterson, went in and found some old checks that Judy had been paid with. And see, we had a book where we wrote down each town we went to, what was the mileage between, who won the whole 9 yards. And Moolah was stealing, from what we could figure out, what Judy could figure out. Moolah was stealing probably 50% off the top and then taking her 25% out of the other 50%. So she was not only stealing, she was double dipping too. And Judy has the proof. She went to a lawyer and the lawyer said, sure, you've got a case, but you ain't got enough money because Moolah had a stranglehold on McMahon. I mean, there's rumors running around as to why, and I'm not going to go into it here, why she had that stranglehold, but she had a stranglehold. And the only two people that would pay us in cash, like I said, was Don Owens and Bill Watts.
Well, that speaks highly of Don and Bill for sure.
Oh, two of the best people I've ever met in my life. Don did so much for me and Velvet. He did everything he could to keep us working, as did Sandy, as did the boys. They would, let's have a mixed tag team. Let's do this. Let's do that. And we do 2 or 3 weeks in Don Owens. Then we've started with Ed Moretti in Idaho. Then we went to Portland. And then we went to Al Tomko in All-Star Wrestling. Then we came back to Portland and they tried to get us, they did their best. And Sandy did his best. So I can't find anything wrong with them at all. Those two men, they took care of us the best they could.
I know you worked Madison Square Garden. How special was that for you, especially considering Lady Wrestling was banned there for so many years?
If you watch the match the night that Velvet and I got the belts from Joyce and Wendy, when I get in the ring and before they announce us, you'll see me. I've got Velvet's arm and we're looking around and I looked up. I said, Velvet, look at all these blanking people. I was so nervous. I messed up the first move. Of course, Wendy covered it And you can't tell because that's the way us girls did. It was after that, my nerves settled down, and the match went beautifully. Madison Square Garden was the creme de la creme. And I'll never forget the day that we got the belts the first time. I see Velvet and I, we had a thing between us, whether we were wrestling each other or we were working as a tag team, there was this chemistry. She didn't have to tell me what she was going to do. All she had to do was touch me, and that's like with Judy Martin. Judy and I were in the ring one night and I had an arm bar on her and I did this move out of nowhere. We had never done it together where I rolled out over her back and grabbed her left arm and gave her a arm sling by her left arm. Judy and I had never practiced that, but she went with it like we had been doing it all the time. And that was the only time, and that was the first time I did it. Well, the girls, we were like, all right, I can't tell you how many beds that we busted, honing the craft in the motel room, taking bumps and oh, can we do this or can we do that? Ula booked the hotel, so I guess she had to pay for it.
You mentioned winning the titles, and Mike interviewed Stan Stasiak, who, as all of our listeners know, I say is the greatest wrestler in the history of the world because he said hi to me when I was 7 years old, the first wrestling match I ever went to him against Don Leo Jonathan. So, of course, he's the greatest. When did you know you were going to win the title at that night? And Stan was kayfabing him and said, when I beat him. So my question to you is, what was your reaction when they said you guys are going to win the titles?
They told us 5 minutes before we walked into the ring, and that's when we knew. And we did title shots from, I believe that was in June or July of 83. And we had the titles from there to the night I broke my neck in Philadelphia.
Yeah. But you feel pretty honored because you'd only been in the business a few years.
Oh, of course. To this day, I have my personal page and I have my fan page. And then my fans are on my personal page too. And I talk to them. And the first time somebody came to me and said, I remember you, I was like, wow, I was in the business for 4 years. How do you remember me? It's amazing to me. I mean, I don't know what I did right, but I had to have done something right. I have had people, especially with my first book, come to me, and I'm going to tell you right now, that was the reason I wrote the book like it has been written, because I wanted to let people know that no matter how far down or how hard it is to crawl out of that bed or go back home or whatever because of what was happening, there's still a light at the end of the tunnel. Look what I went through and look where I ended up. And I've actually had, believe it or not, and this is something that really means a lot to me, is men that have gone through what I went through, don't tell anybody. And I've got a brother who committed suicide due to what happened to us as children. I've got another brother that died of AIDS because my bio mother sent him to this guy who had AIDS and was also a pedophile. But I want people to know, yeah, it was horrible. I'm not going to lie. My childhood, every day, if you walked into a room in that house, your muscles automatically tensed. My stepfather was going to find some reason to lay his hands on you. And I've actually had a couple of men, come to me with their stories. And to be able to help somebody like that because of my book, that's why I wrote it that way. There's too many people committing suicide because they can't let it. And I'm not saying pretend it never happened. What I'm saying is it's not your fault. You've got to quit blaming yourself or you're going to end up dead. Yeah. And I had a counselor when I was 14. Now, I'll be 65 in May. At 14, is when this counselor talked to me, and I still remember her name to this day. She told me, Vicki, you've got two choices. You can take this road on the left and live in self-pity and let this drive you crazy, or you can take the road to the right, thank the powers that be, because most kids who have been through what you've been through are dead, buried in a field somewhere, and nobody knows where they are.
But
And that's what I'm trying to pass on.
Well, we appreciate you sharing that part of your story. We've talked recently about some of the mental aspects of some of the wrestlers who committed suicide. And so having that, knowing that it's okay to talk about things and get help, that's a really important part. And we only have probably two more questions. I want to talk about, you mentioned the injuring your neck in your career. Talk about that night and how it happened.
We were in the ring, and this was a dark match. There was no film. There was nobody was filming it. And a young lady picked me up. I can't remember if it was hang me in the turnbuckle or do a pile driver. And whatever it was, there was a wrinkle in the mat. Believe me, a tiny little wrinkle this long can kill you in the ring. And she hit this wrinkle and she sat down. I finished the match. I did not know my neck was broken. And I headed back to the dressing rooms. Belle and I took the match. I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel strange. And I was in the dressing room cooling off, because you don't take a shower while you're still sweating. It's useless. And I bent over the first time like this to untie my boot, and something, just out in my back. And I sat up and I did what 100% of the wrestlers do. What muscle have I pulled now, and how long is it going to take? So I sat there for probably another 10, 15 minutes. And this is one of the from this point, when I reached down to untie my boots, I remember reaching down, and I don't know how loud I screamed, but I had to have screamed really loud. The next thing I remember, I'm on a gurney. I got Moolah to my left. I've got Roddy Piper to my right, and two EMTs are putting me in this ambulance. Then there's no memory until the two doctors tell me that I've got a broken neck. The next thing I remember is I'm in Columbia at Mullah's Hill, and I have little blanks, that pop up. But as for 2 or 3 weeks after that, I don't remember anything significant. And that just goes to show it doesn't take much to die in the ring.
You mentioned the mat. And so I'm going to ask one final thing, but I want to tell you the story is that we just saw Jules Strongbow at the Portland Wrestling Expo, and he and Mike Miller had a similar thing where the mat caught Miller's leg and had an injury. But they did really big business coming back from that when Mike could return, because it was a personal issue. And as you've mentioned, personal issues is what really drives the crowds, doesn't it?
And the fans, and this is something that these kids have to learn today. Without the fans, there's no Princess Victoria. I'm Vicki. There's no Princess Victoria. And I know if you look back in the history, there have been, Owen Hart is the easiest one. There has been men, and I can't remember his name, where he was in a tag team. He tagged his partner in, and he sat down right on the inside of the ring with his back up against the turnbuckle, and he died right there in the ring. Died of a heart attack. And I've broken both my wrists at least twice. I broke my ankle, especially my left one. And when the weather starts flipping back and forth, believe me, everything swells up. I'm doing DDPY yoga right now with Tom Strasnes, and he has helped me a lot. And it doesn't take much. When you get in that ring, you're handing your body to somebody else to take care of. And anything can happen. Like you said, and unfortunately, there's been several people die in the ring over the years.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So I want to end on one part here where I want to give you a couple names and you tell me your thoughts about that person, whether it's one sentence or a paragraph. It doesn't matter. How about Hacksaw Sawyer?
Hacksaw Sawyer.
Short
Yes,
with,
I know exactly who Hacksaw is. That was Buzz Sawyer's little brother.
yes.
Hacksaw and I were good friends. And I had gotten to New York. A vendor brought me in and he mentioned Hacksaw. And I said, call him up. I said, let's meet up. I haven't seen him in 40 years. Let's meet up. And he just dropped his head and he said, Vicky, he died 3 days ago. But a good wrestler, a great technical wrestler, and not saying anything bad against the dead, but here we go, Bus Sawyer. So,
Mm,
those two are nothing alike.
yeah.
They're on different spectrums. I respected, Hacksaw Sawyer. Bud Sawyer almost hurt me in training. What happened was Sandy was teaching backdrops and he had Buzz as the person giving the backdrop. When I went on his back and went to flip, he pushed my legs and he pushed them so hard, I ended up flipping and landing on my feet.
Oh,
And Sandy Barr told him, get the hell out of my ring, get the hell out of my ring now. Don't ever come to a training session again. Buzz Sawyer he was not a nice person.
a guy who is a good friend of Mike's and mine and who I booked in Portland Wrestling. He wrestled for me as Top Gun. That's Dave Sierra, who wrestled when you were here as the Destroyer, but he's been here as the Assassin and a number of people. A great guy. Your thoughts on Dave Sierra?
Dave Sierra is a great guy, like you said. He could, in fact, I just saw him. It's been 2 years. It was at the gathering that I went to. By the way, guys, I'm going to the gathering this year, Charlotte, and I'm going to debut my new book there.
Yeah.
But no, David Sierra, a gentleman and a scholar. Great wrestler, in my opinion.
And the very last one, and I only have one match that I know you were in a mixed tag team. It was you and Hacksaw Sawyer against Velvet and Chris Colt. What do you know about Chris Colt? Because we love Chris Colt stories.
Chris Colt. Boys all thought Chris was crazy. Chris was working the workers because Chris was a good friend of mine, a very, very good friend of mine. He happened to be probably one of the first men to come out as gay in the wrestling world. I believe he was before Pat Patterson. Chris had a heart of gold. A lot of people don't know this, but he was dating Janis Joplin when she died. And when he told me that, I'm going, I'm green, but I'm not that green. He took me into his closet, this walk-in closet, and there were hundreds of pictures of him and Janis. And Chris was a very sexual person. A heart the size of Texas, and he never told all that crazy crap when him and I were talking. He was working the boys. I was going to say he was no crazier than me, and he was a heck of a wrestler too. Heck of a wrestler.
Yeah, a real performer, real colorful. Mike, any final questions?
Yeah, just this one last one. What are some of your hobbies and how do you spend your time today?
I make jewelry, and I make jewelry to order. This is one of my favorites right here. Yeah, and once again, buffalo bone, tiger eye, and quartz crystal. And this is what I do. It keeps me out of trouble. They should have had this when I was young. I should have been doing this when I was younger. And then we've got, of course, the book that I co-authored with John Cosper, Princess Victoria, A Tale of Tears, Triumphs, and Turnbuckles. And y'all need to be at the gathering because I'm going to debut my new book.
Yeah, let's remind our listeners about that brand new book. It's coming out in July, titled Fighting the Wrong Side of the Sun. It's going to be available starting July 22nd at the Gathering fan event in North Carolina. And after that, Vicky, where will fans be able to pick that up?
They can contact me directly on Facebook. My Facebook page is www.facebook.com/VickyOtis.7. Or they can just look up Vicky Otis with an I, VICKI OTIS on Facebook, and I'm usually the first one to pops up. You can get my jewelry there. You can get my book. I send autographed books. They're $35, including autograph and postage, even though postage has gone up twice. I used to pay $5.40 a year ago to mail a package. It's up to $10.50 for the same package now.
Jeez.
Well, I haven't went up on my price on the postage other than to $10. And I'm hoping they don't go up higher because it's, I don't like having to charge postage, but I do.
Yeah.
And if I don't, I'm not going to make any money.
Right.
And if you want a personal piece of jewelry made, I will help you. You tell me the colors that you want in that piece of jewelry, a bracelet, a necklace, a choker. I have even started making earrings here lately. You tell me the colors you want, and I will work with you until we get the right colors and until you like it.
So Mike and I have both read your first book. It is a must read. Some amazing stories in there, and you shared about your childhood and going through. It's great. And this next book, Fighting the Wrong Side of the Sun, again, out starting July 22nd at the Gathering Fan Event in North Carolina. If you want to go to a fan event, the Portland Expo was great, but man, this one has got the who's who, and you can see Princess Victoria there and pick up her book. So Vicky Otis, Princess Victoria, thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of Ringside in Rose City. It truly has been an honor to have you on, to remember your career, hear the stories of your battles inside and outside the ring, long before women wrestlers had their own pay-per-view, where you really were a true revolutionary. So thanks for your contributions, thanks for your sacrifices, and for the victories you battled that paved the way for the wrestlers of today. So thank you again. Any final words you'd have for our listeners?
Stay safe. Thank you for being a fan. I appreciate it because, like I said, without you guys out there, I'm nobody. Thank you. Thank you for holding my wrestling memories high. I appreciate it.
Mike, not every legend gets the spotlight. Some of them build the foundation and never get the credit. And that's Princess Victoria. She came up when women really had to fight just to be taken seriously, and then fight once again once they got in the ring. But make no mistake, she earned her place in this business and in its history. So tonight, we remember Princess Victoria, a pioneer and a fighter. Mike, any final thoughts?
I was really happy. She did a great job. Lots and lots of stories. It's really nice for a change. We always think of wrestling from the male point of view. So it's really good to hear, from a different point of view. And I thought she did a really great job. Lots of great stories.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And so with that, I want to remind listeners to be sure to follow us and subscribe on Spotify, Amazon, and YouTube. New episodes drop every Thursday. And follow us on X at Excitement Air. Lots of great posts and information there. Don't forget to check out the wrestling books by Mike Rogers on Amazon, the 3 Excitement in the Air books, great collections of interviews Mike collected over 30 years of writing his monthly newsletter, Ring Around the Northwest. You'll read interviews by Don Leo Jonathan, Lou Thez, Tony Bourne, Pampero Firpo, and so many more. And even, as we've mentioned before, a very rare Don Owen interview. Then there's Katie Bar the Door, the history of Portland wrestling, covering the beginnings of the Owen promotions, but focusing heavily starting in 1960 to the close of the promotion. And of course, if you want details, and who doesn't, then pick up the Encyclopedia of Portland Wrestlers from the House of Action. Over 500 pages, bios on every wrestler who had even one match at the Portland Sports Arena, and of course, results of every card from the start of the Portland Sports Arena era in October 1968. And last, but definitely not least, is, the history of Hawaii wrestling. Another giant book, over 520 pages, covering everything from pre-Pearl Harbor wrestling to the Francis promotion to the Maivia family and the controversies of that promotion. Hawaii wrestling in the 60s and 70s, some of the very best wrestling in the world. So be sure to pick up a copy today on Amazon. And with that, I'm Frank Culbertson, joined again by
Mike Rogers.
And this has been Ringside in Rose City. One ring, one city, and 1,000 stories. And as always, this is wrestling. Wrestling the way it should be. Lisa, take us home.
And that's a wrap from Ringside in Rose City, where one ring, one city, and 1,000 stories never fail to deliver. I'm Lisa Hughes, and this has been a Yaski production. Catch every episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your wrestling fix. Until next time, keep your boots laced, your popcorn buttered, and your stories ready.